Today we are continuing our message series from 1 Peter called You Are Chosen. So we have been talking for about 9 or 10 weeks now about how we have been chosen by God to follow Jesus at this time, in this place, among these people, and under these circumstances. Nothing we are encountering has caught him off guard or by surprise, and nothing we're facing should cause us to stop moving forward as followers of Jesus. 1 Peter is probably one of the perfect letters for us as a church to be studying this particular season because it's written to a group of believers who face very uncertain circumstances. Peter was one of the original 12 disciples. He's one of the apostles, the leaders of the early church, and he writes this letter to a group of churches in modern-day Turkey in the early to mid-60s, not 1960s, but just 60s. They're living under the Roman Emperor Nero. Persecution is a very real threat. They have perhaps started even to experience a bit of it themselves. And so Peter's writing to remind them, you can persevere because you've been chosen by God to follow him. And so today we're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 4. It's part 2. Last week we started in chapter 4, verse 1 of Peter telling us what it looks like to live on mission. And last week we heard him telling us, now that you have been chosen by Jesus, you no longer live for your old sinful human desires, but instead you live exclusively and completely for the will of God. And then he talked to us about some of the behaviors we have to put away. He talked to us about how Jesus is going to judge our actions and the things we do. And then today he's going to shift and be a little more positive with us of now that you're living for the will of God, this is what it looks like to live on mission. So in the passage we're going to read, he's going to tell us a couple things. First of all, he's going to remind us you need to live on mission because the end is near and there's an urgency to the gospel. Then he's going to tell us this is what it looks like in community for us to live together on mission. It means we're going to love each other and we're going to be hospitable to one another. And finally, he's going to tell us, now that you know all this, it's time to go to work. Do your job as part of living on God's mission in your life. So if you have a Bible, it'll be in 1 Peter chapter 4, starting in verse 7. If not, it's going to be here on the screens for you. Peter writes, the end of all things is near. Therefore, be alert and of sober mind so that you can pray. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. All right, so Peter's telling us you're going to live on mission, and he chooses to start with a really interesting reminder. The end is near. I don't know about you, but when I hear that phrase, I immediately picture a crazed-looking man holding a cardboard sign, and on the front it says the end is near. And he's got a wild beard, and he's got wild beard. I said not wild beer. Maybe both, I don't know. Wild hair, crazy eyes, and is on a street corner somewhere yelling. And as you walk by, he wants you to know the end is near, and it's probably your fault. And you better get ready because God's going to judge you. He's ready to go. Right? But this is not Peter. Peter is making a calm, factual, faith-filled statement based off of his experience with Jesus. Jesus had promised his disciples after his resurrection, before his ascension, that he would return. The early church lived with an eager expectation that Jesus would return in their lifetime. They had this imminent hope that it could happen at any day, at any time. They must always be ready. And so Peter writes to a persecuted church to remind them, you have to live on mission because the end is near. And their response to the end being a possibility at any moment was not to lose their minds, was not to freak out, but what's he say? The end is near, so be alert, have a sober mind so that you can pray. Now think how different that is from some of the advice that has been given over the past 100 years for how Christians should prepare for the end. The end is near. So invest in gold, buy your guns, and get ready to shoot your neighbor. All right, have you heard that? The end is near. Build your bunker and get your canned food because they're coming for you. And now listen, Peter, the people he's writing to, they are under a far more direct threat than you and I are in 2020 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Right? They live under Nero. Nero uses Christians. He attaches them to posts in his garden, lights them on fire, and uses them as lights for his garden parties. This is the world in which they live. Yet when Peter writes to them, he says, the end is near, but he doesn't tell them, so get your swords and head to the hills. He says, the end is near, so be alert. Pay attention to what's going on around you, but your alertness is not just to the current events of your world. Your alertness is to the fact that the end of all things is a moment of hope for followers of Jesus. We do not fear the return of Christ or the circumstances leading up to it. We live with an eager expectation for a new heavens, a new earth, that he will wipe every tear from every eye. And so we don't bunker down, but instead the end is near causes us to look forward of how can I fill my mission right here and right now to tell as many people as I can, as often as I can, who Jesus is so they can eagerly expect his return with me. So Peter says, you're going to be alert. Keep it right there at the front of your brain. He also says you're going to be sober-minded. The end is near. So if you're going to live on mission, you've got to remember Jesus is coming. You can be alert to the circumstances of the world, but when you consider what's going on in the world, you're not going to lose your mind because you remember who Jesus is, what Jesus has promised, and what Jesus will do. Sober-minded Christians do not contribute to the chaos of society. They are a calming influence. And that is part of our job and part of our responsibility. We are to always be people of hope, people who look forward, people who believe God is at work, and will restore and renew all things. And so Peter says, when you approach it this way and have this sober mind, the end result is you're going to spend more time in prayer. Be alert, have a sober mind, so that you may pray. Not so that you may post, so that you may pray. Right? Which is just a wonderful reminder that we all need of the problems I face in the world, the uncertainties that surround me, the things that aggravate me or frustrate me. My first job as a follower of Jesus is to talk to him about those first. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. When we take time to engage in serious prayer, it's an opportunity for God to reorient our priorities and to remind us of our mission, to be his witnesses and his people at this place, in this time, in these circumstances. He has chosen us to be part of his kingdom here. And when we pray, we're reminded of that. And when we pray, we begin to engage in that process. So Peter reminds us your mission is urgent. There is an end coming. You don't have all the time in the world to do this. And then he shifts and begins to show us, now here's how your mission is actually going to play out in the context of this local community. So again, Peter writes this letter to a group of local churches. And each church is supposed to read it and apply it in their immediate context. So for us at Christian Chapel, we're reading it, and our first question is, how does this apply here with the people who are part of this local expression of the church with me? And what Peter shows us is part of living on mission is you and I make a choice that we are going to love each other and we're going to be hospitable towards each other. And so he says to us in verse 8, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. So there's some ideas there that we can kind of quickly pick up on and think, okay, I know what that means. I know what it means to love deeply. But what Peter's telling us here, it's a different type of love than the love you have for particular types of food, your favorite sports team, all of these kinds of things. Right? It's even a different love than maybe what you have for your spouse or for your children, these people that God has just intrinsically bound your hearts together. But to love deeply in the context of Christian community means you and I both have to make a choice that I will love you and you will love me past the point of comfort. So one scholar, he writes about it, and he says that the best way to understand love deeply is to think of it as love at full stretch. And I don't know how many of you have a stretching routine you go through every day. I do not. In fact, I think the only time I stretch is when something hurts, which is typically too late by that point, but I'll still try. But you know what it is? I actually thought about having you stand up and do this with me, but I wanted to save the person behind you from the view. So when you and you from being worried about what are they, because, never mind. But you have that feeling, right? If we were to all stand up and say, okay, on the count of 3, we're going to touch our toes. Now, all of us across the room, we're going to feel the stretch at different points. And so if I told you, now try to touch your toes. When you get to the spot, raise your hand. Some of you, as soon as you stand up, you're going to raise your hand. They're already tight, and this is as far as I can go. Others of you, you're going to get to here, right? You're going to feel like, okay, I can feel it. Now, some of you are going to get a little farther down. Some of you down. Some of you are going to touch the floor. Some of you, like you're the super freak former gymnast, and you're going to flatten your fingers out and kind of walk out and do all around. But here's the thing. No matter how flexible you are, no matter how much or how little you stretch, eventually you're going to reach that point of, I have to make a choice to go any farther because this isn't comfortable anymore. Now, when Peter tells us to love at full stretch, this is kind of the image we should have in our mind. You've got to get to that point in loving each other where it's now not natural or easy. But if you're going to love deeply as part of your mission of following Jesus, you've got to push past that space. Right? So when you stretch, again, I'm not a physical therapist or anything, but generally I understand that when I stretch, it's only beneficial if I find that point of resistance, push just a little bit past it, and then hold it there for a little bit. So in our love for each other, we love the idea, like, you know what I love? I love the idea of each one of you loving me at full stretch. You should love me when I make it uncomfortable. When I'm selfish or arrogant or annoying or I do something wrong, I want you to love me past the point of comfort. Now, the thing Peter's telling me, though, is no, my concern is not how you love me, it's how I love you. And so I have to love you past that point. And if we are to really present the transformed community witness that Jesus intends the church to be, then you have to commit to me and I have to commit to you. If we will love deeply, we will love at full stretch. But I know it's hard in a local church to do that. Dr. Howard Marshall writes about the challenges of loving this way in the local church. And I just want to read what he says to you. And I also want to assure you he wrote this a long time ago. He's never been to Christian Chapel. And any similar names are pure coincidence. Okay? So he writes about the challenges. He says it's hard to love in the local church like this because there in your local church is Anne, who doesn't know much about hygiene and is frankly smelly. Bill wears you out with incessant talking. Kathy is unspiritual. Don doesn't get along with Evelyn. Fred treats his wife badly. Jean is an awkward teenager, never knowing how to act with courtesy and discretion. Hillary often grumbles. Irene has a mixed up set of interests and values. And so on it goes. There's Kevin, to be sure, who is really quite saintly, but rather drab as a person. None of them is easy to love at full stretch. There's also, of course, me, and I figure in other people's lists of difficult people to love for similar reasons. And yet, love is the answer to the problem. We find a whole host of offenses, real and imagined, in other people, and only love will overcome them. And regard them as of no account because love covers over a multitude of sins. What Marshall reminds us of is that to love deeply will be stretching. It's also risky. Because not only are you going to have to push past your point of comfort, but to love deeply is to open your heart and life up to people who could very well hurt you, reject you, or take advantage of you. But it's not love deeply when it's safe or convenient. It's love deeply all of the time. And then Peter goes on to tell us, when you love this way, it covers over a multitude of sins. Now, what he's telling us here is this love that covers, it's not a love that covers up. And he's not saying in Christian community, because we love each other, we're never going to confront sin. It doesn't mean that I'm never going to have to ask you for repentance or you're never going to have to seek forgiveness from me. But what it means is that when we love each other deeply, When another person wrongs us, we're not looking to out them or expose them, but we're looking to cover that up through forgiveness and grace to bring healing and restoration to a relationship. Love that covers up. I mean, think back to when you were a kid and your parents told you to clean your room. Some of you might have done what I did on occasion of your bed already wasn't made, right? The covers were already down. And so you picked up the dirty clothes and you picked up the toys or the books or whatever was on the floor. You threw it on the bed and then you pulled the cover over the bed and you went back out and watched ESPN more. And when your mom said, "Did you clean your room?" You're like, "Sure did. Everything's off the floor." And she walks in there and it looks like there's a dead person in your bed, right? And so if your mom was like mine, it was, "This does not count. Get back in here. Put all this stuff away." When Peter said love covers up a multitude of sins, it's not that it covers up to conceal, but that it covers up to heal. Right? He comes and lays this blanket of love over us. In fact, if you flip over to, I think it's Genesis chapter 9. So in Genesis chapter 9, you find the story of Moses after the flood. And he's done wonderful things for God. He's been so faithful, so obedient. And then Moses, he kind of falls off, or Noah, sorry, not, Noah in the ark, not Moses in the ark. But Noah, he has this moment where he kind of falls off the cliff. God has just delivered him, done miraculous things for him. It says in chapter 9, verse 20, "Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked him backward and covered their father's naked body. Their faces were turned the other way so that they would not see their father naked." When Peter says love covers over a multitude of sins, this is kind of the image you should have in your mind. Not naked Noah laying on the ground, but his sons, right? There's two responses. When someone sins in the community of faith, as their fellow believers who love them deeply, we have two options. We can run out and tell everyone about them, try to expose them and humiliate them, or we can try to cover them up in their sin, not to conceal, but to heal. It doesn't mean there's not a need for repentance. It doesn't mean there's not a need for confession. But what it does mean is because I love you at full stretch and you love me at full stretch, then when one of us screws up, the desire is not, "I can't wait to tell everyone." It's, "Hey, let's bring you back in as quickly and discreetly as we can. And then you can tell your story of forgiveness and healing and restoration in your time. But it's not my job to broadcast to the whole world what's happened here." Covers up to conceal, not to conceal, but to heal. And then Peter gives us a very practical way of love in action. He says, "Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling." Now, for the first century church, hospitality was essential to the life of the church. They did not have a building like we sit in this morning. If they did, they probably would have taken advantage of it, but that was not an option for them. And so their meetings as churches depended on people in the church opening up their homes and welcoming others in. And because they met in homes, then their weekly worship often involved eating a meal together as well. So there were layers of hospitality that were occurring there. And then because many of the early preachers, teachers, church leaders, they traveled around and took care of several different congregations. When they arrived in a new town, they were dependent on the hospitality of those local believers to have a place to stay, to have food to eat. Hospitality was interwoven into the early life of the church and was really one of the things responsible for the growth of the church. Christians became known as hospitable people. Those who would throw open the doors to their house, who would welcome others who were different from them at their table, and the world began to notice the thing that's different about them is they put their love in action. Now, for you and I, we live in a world of church buildings and hotels and restaurants, and so we don't have to depend on being hospitable the same way the first century church did, and yet hospitality remains an important part of living on mission for Jesus Christ. Just because we don't have to doesn't mean we shouldn't. We should still open our homes. We should still pull out a seat at our table. We should still invite others in who are not like us, who are different than us, who the only unifying factor we have is our relationship with Jesus. We should be known as hospitable people. And I know some of you are naturally gifted hosts and hostesses. Right? And how many of you love having people over to your house? Anybody? Everybody else look around like these are the people you can invite yourself over. How many of you love cooking for other people? Yes. How many of you love making big breakfast with lots of bacon and sausage for other people? Okay. Angie, write down those names, and we will come see you all. But there's just, like some of you, even when you read this, it's just natural, it's second nature to you. Of course this is what we do. Right? And so many of us, we've benefited from that natural gifting you have. I've enjoyed meals in your homes. Right? I've borrowed your pickups. I've done all kinds of things because you're just naturally giving, generous, welcome, come on in type of people. For others, though, it's not a natural thing to open your home, open your life, open your table to welcome other people in. But whether it's natural for you or it's unnatural and you have to be disciplined to do it, we can all agree the scriptures command us to do it. Peter does not say those of you who are gifted should offer hospitality to one another. He says, you offer hospitality to one another. It's a command in the same way we all have to love, we all have to be hospitable. And then he gives us a little warning that is just hits a little too close to home for me. And do it without grumbling. Right? Now, if you're a natural host or hostess, you probably don't grumble too much because it kind of gives life to your soul when you're able to welcome people into your home. But for some others, maybe who that's not a natural gift, there is definitely a potential for grumbling. I don't know if you ever had this experience. I experienced it as a child, a teenager, and now as a parent, but on different sides of the equation. So somebody's coming over to your house, right? And as a kid, my parents would tell me, okay, hey, somebody's coming over for dinner, so we're cleaning the house. And there was normal clean, and there was company clean, right? Anybody else in your house, you had the difference? You know, in our house, we had there were 6 of us. We had four kids, my 2 parents, and we just had one, like my parents had a bathroom, but then there was one bathroom that was the guest bathroom / the 4 teenagers' bathroom as well. So there was always the insistence of that bathroom has to be company clean. And then my siblings and I would fight, you know, and my brother and I would try to tell the girls of like, you guys do it because your hair's everywhere. And they're like, well, you do the toilet because that's all your fault. You know, and so it was just kind of the back and forth. But my parents would insist and they wouldn't relent. And you know, because we were teenagers and we'd respond with like, well, we don't do this when my friends come over. Eventually they reverted to just start barking out orders. Get the vacuuming done. Get the toilet cleaned. Get the kitchen ready. Do these kinds of things, right? And the more we barked, the more they barked. And so by the end of that process, you know, it's getting close. And sometimes you're going right up to the start time of people arriving. And I remember moments as a child, and now I've had them as a parent, where you hear the doorbell ring and you are turning around yelling at your children, you better finish that stupid vacuuming. Hey, welcome. We're so glad to see you. So glad you could come over. We've just been eagerly waiting for you all day, right? And your kids are like, go upstairs and dry your tears. Come down when your face isn't splotchy. You know, and you've had those. For some of us, like hospitality just creates this tension. And then people leave, right? And so they leave, and hopefully you've had a wonderful time, and you close the door and you turn and look around, and that floor that was clean is not clean anymore. That kitchen that was spotless is a disaster. If your guests had toddlers, you don't even go to look really in any place. You just like call the realtor and put your house for sale because there's no redemption at this point. All right, but at that point, there's that moment of you close the door of like, I can't believe we are never doing that again. But I remember at times saying to my parents and hearing the echoes in my own kid's life of, why do we have to get people over all the time? You're so mean before they come. And yet Peter says, if you're going to love deeply, if you're going to love at full stretch, you're going to be hospitable. And what does being hospitable do? It stretches you. Do you still love even when it's inconvenient? Do you still love even when it's hard? Do you still love even if they don't eat the food that's put out in front of them? Do you still love even if they make some comments about some things in your house? Do you still welcome people in even when it's difficult, when you're stretched past your comfort? Do you still love? He's telling us you want to see love in action? Love in action is open hearts, open homes, open tables. Come on in, let's go. which means we all have a responsibility to extend hospitality. Your hospitality does not depend on the size of your house, right? You can be hospitable. I mean, for Angie and I remember our little apartment in Springfield when we first got married and cramming 15 or 20 high school students in there. There wasn't room for them, right? It wasn't nice. It was, hey, sit on the floor. Somebody might have been murdered there before we moved in. We don't know. It's crunchy in that spot, though, but, you're a teenager. It's fine. Like, hospitality is not Peter's not saying, hey, when you've achieved a Southern living standard, then go ahead and have some people over. Right? When your dining room looks like the Mathis Brothers showroom, then it's time to invite them over. Say, no, wherever you live, wherever you are, whatever you do, God has given you resources, He's given you a home, and you can welcome others into it. So open your heart, open your home. I remember times when our kids were little, we would invite people over for dinner, and we had the high chair corner in our dining room. And in the high chair corner, there were like permanent food stains on the wall on both sides. There's a circle in the carpet because who carpets a dining room? The people we bought our house from, right? And just all of these reasons that you thought we can't have anyone over till this is taken care of. But Angie and I made that decision when our kids were little. If we wait till they stop making messes to have people over, we're not going to have friends for 20 years. So we've just got to do it, right? You've just got to step in. So you have a responsibility to extend it, but we also have a responsibility to receive hospitality. Part of loving deeply is not just me looking to you and saying, hey, come in. It's also me saying, I'll accept the invitation you extend, even if it's not convenient, even if it's not what I want to do, even if I'd rather just stay. I mean, for the introverts, this is for you right now. You have to sometimes say yes and go to someone's house. You can't stay home by yourself all the time. Right? Go be friendly. Go say yes. Go enjoy their meal. They might feed you something you would never eat anywhere else. Tell them it was the most delicious thing you've ever had in your life. Right? Like Angie and I are not fish people. And we've had friends that they go all out and they make these beautiful like salmon fillets. And we just honestly tell them it's the best salmon we've ever had. Please give it to someone else next time who appreciates it more because I think it's expensive. I don't know. I'll eat a hot dog. And so you have those. But give it and receive it. And so sometimes you even have to have that talk with your kids as they're growing up of, hey, these people are opening their home to us. We want to make it easy for them to be hospitable, and we want to remove some of the temptations for them to grumble that they invited us over. So eat the food, clean up after yourselves, and say thank you. Right? Just kind of some common decency. I mean, this is what I love about the New Testament epistles is they have these like soaring theological statements about who Jesus is and how He works. And then they just come down in the very practical, real world of this is what it looks like in community. Because God has welcomed you, you now welcome others. Because He's opened His home to you, you now open yours to others. Because He shared His Son with you, you now share everything you have with others. Hospitality is love in action. Now, if you have no idea where to start, home groups at Christian Chapel are a beautiful place where you can learn to love deeply and offer hospitality. Whether you host one or attend one, it's a chance for you to begin to enter into those communities. So those are the first and third Sunday of each month at Christian Chapel. They meet in homes all over Tulsa. You can stop by the Welcome Center. You can go to christianchapel.com/groups and see the groups that are about to start on the third Sunday of September. You can sign up for one next Sunday. The Sunday after that, you'll have opportunities to do that. But in these spaces, we're opening our hearts, we're opening our homes, we're entering into relationship, and you're going to figure out eventually with someone in your home group that there is something they do, say, or believe that it makes it stretching for you to love them. But you can take comfort because there's something you will say, do, or believe that'll make it stretching for them to love you. But we're all going to make a commitment in that space of, hey, that's okay. We're going to love deeply. We believe that our love will cover over a multitude of sins, and we're going to offer hospitality to one another without grumbling because this is part of our mission in life. This is what Jesus has called us to do. And then Peter finishes by telling us, the last part of living on mission is we have to be productive. He says in verse 10, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. So that first point he makes to us is if you're going to follow Jesus and if you're going to live on mission, you need to get to work. He has gifted you. I love that phrase. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received. Peter's assumption is that God has gifted you with something that is beneficial to others and will build God's kingdom. And now you have an opportunity to be a faithful steward of that gift of grace in all its various forms. And what that means is the gifts that God gives to us are not just restricted to some of the spiritual gifts we see listed in the scriptures. Now, those are definitely part, right? So if we're trying to examine, okay, if I need to get to work, where do I need to get to work? Well, the first thing we're going to look at and say, are there certain spiritual gifts that God has given me? And if so, how can I steward those well for His glory and for the good of others? Then we can start to ask questions like, well, what has God put in my heart? If He's gifted me, what has He put here? What raises my temperature? What gets me passionate? What makes me angry? What makes me excited? What has He put in there? And as you start to follow that path, you'll start to see, here are some spaces where God has gifted me. Some of those might be really spiritual. Some of them might not be spiritual at all. But if God put it there, He can use it. Then you're going to look at, what are some of my natural abilities? Or what are the things that come naturally to me? Things that I'm good at that others aren't good at. And in those spaces, how can I use those abilities to show others the love of Jesus and His grace at work in their life? Then if you're still struggling, thinking, I still don't see any gifts, start looking at your personality. Are you an introvert or are you an extrovert? Are you a natural follower or are you a natural leader? Would you rather work alone? Would you rather work in teams? And as you start to answer some of those questions, you're going to start to see, here are some spaces where I can use these aspects of my personality to point others to the grace of Jesus. And then the last thing you can look at is your own experiences. In what parts of my life, in my personal history, have I seen God work? Where have I felt the most fulfilled serving Him? Where have others reported back that what I did was beneficial to them? All right, so you're going to ask both the positive of your experiences, and you're also going to ask the negative of, where are some of the spaces where I thought God was going to use me and it was a huge embarrassing failure and everyone asked me to never do it again. And then I'll just kind of stop and step away from those. But Peter's point is, you're all gifted. Each one of you received a gift. I told you earlier, I grew up in a family of 4 kids. We all went to public school in Kansas, and in elementary school, they would do testing for gifted children. So I had an older sister, then there was me, a little brother, and a little sister. So we all took the tests at, about the same point. I forget what that was, maybe second grade or so. And my sister was 1 year older than me in school, and she took the gifted test and scored high and got into the gifted program. I assumed that meant that all the Dows were gifted, and that the next year when I took the test, I would get into the gifted program. So the next year I took the gifted test, and I did not get in to the gifted program. They did not call my parents to tell them that my score was close and maybe I should try again. It was just, absence was a pretty loud, the no response from my teachers spoke pretty loudly to my parents, or confirmed what my parents already thought. I don't know. But so Mindy was gifted, and now I had proof that I was not. So then I thought, well, that's fine. It's probably just like an older sister thing. And then a couple years later, when I was in 5th grade, my little brother took the gifted test, and he was in the gifted program. And so I was sandwiched between 2 people who had proof from the public school system that they were gifted and proof that I was not. And wouldn't you know, they let me know frequently that they were gifted and I was not. And no, don't feel sorry, because I fully deserved and earned every single bit of what they said and did to me. So then a couple years later, my little sister takes the gifted program. And she's special like me, though. So she didn't make it in either, right? But it's okay, because she was the baby and nobody ever bothered her, and she's going to get whatever she wants in life anyway, so she doesn't have to be gifted. So there's just like, I'm the odd duck out, and I think sometimes we can have that approach when we read about spiritual gifts and that God has graced each one of you, and you think, well, yeah, I look around the room and I see he's gifted and she's gifted, but I'm the weird middle brother. God missed me. I didn't pass the test. Peter's trying to help us understand each of you has received a gift. Some of you may be multiple gifts. Some of your gifts may be more visible than others, but each of you are gifted by God in some way to be part of His kingdom at this place, in this time, among these people during this season. So our job is to say, okay, Lord, what gifts have you given me and how can I use them for you? And then Peter shows us 2 quick ways that every one of us, no matter how we're gifted, can use our gifts. The first thing he says is you're going to speak your mission. He says anyone who speaks should speak as if they are speaking the very words of God. Now, this idea is probably the first application Peter makes would be to teachers in those local churches and helping them understand when you get up to speak, to preach, to teach in these congregations, you need to do it with a seriousness of understanding when you proclaim the gospel, you're speaking the words of God. But I think there's also a secondary and an equally valid application of in any space where God's people are using the gifts he has given them for his glory, you're going to have to speak when you do it. And when you speak in that space, whether that's in a classroom or in a body shop or in an office or in your neighborhood or with your children, whether it's offering a prayer or giving instruction, whether it's comforting someone in their grief or rejoicing with them in their celebration, when the words come out of your mouth, you can trust that the Spirit empowers those, and in that space, you are speaking the words of God to them. It means for us as followers of Christ who believe in the active work of his Spirit that there is no such thing as throwaway conversations or meaningless words. But that every time we open our mouth, it contains the potential of God's kingdom being heard in that space. Doesn't mean we're always going to get it right. Doesn't mean, I can't tell you how many Sundays that I go home and ask Angie, did I really say that out loud? And she says, yes, you did. Use the other service for the podcast, right? And we just kind of know and we agree, like, you're not always going to nail it. But you just keep speaking. You just keep trusting. God's going to work through you. He's going to use you. He's going to be part of establishing his kingdom through the exercise of your gifts as you live on mission for him. And then the last thing Peter tells us, we're not just going to speak our mission, we're also going to do our mission. If anyone serves, they should do so with the same strength God provides. You know, there does come this point when you recognize, okay, Jesus has chosen me. I'm to reject my old sinful way of life. I'm to live exclusively for the will of God. The end is near. My time is running out, so there needs to be some urgency to what I'm doing. And you start to see, okay, this is how God has gifted me, and these are the spaces where I could put those gifts to work. You have to make the choice of, okay, but now I actually have to do it. Jesus can reveal everything to us and lay it out in front of us, but we still have to make the choice to obey and take that step forward. And I love what Peter tells us. Anyone who serves should serve by the strength of God. You're not stepping into those spaces because it can be a little nerve-wracking, a little intimidating to step out and begin to serve others, to begin to exercise your gifts, to begin to use those in the world for the service of the kingdom. But Peter wants you to understand when you do that, you're not doing it in your own strength, your own wisdom, your own power. You're doing it through the strength that God provides. And I know for some of us, you've had seasons like me where the work you're doing for God almost felt like it was killing the work of God inside of you. You were stressed out. You were tired, you were burned out, but you knew the responsibility was there, so I have to do it. And so you kept doing it, and you kept doing it, and you kept doing it. And sometimes, in his grace, God got your attention and redirected your energy and your source of strength. But other times, you chased that road all the way to the end, where you decided, if this is what it looks like to serve God, I'm going to be done with this. I'm going to let somebody else do it, and I'm just going to come sit. And sometimes God leads us there so we can sit and we can heal for a little bit. But ultimately, we're all called to participate in the mission of God with the gifts that he's given us. And so my encouragement to you today is if you're burned out, you're stressed out, you're tired, you're discouraged, you're done, perhaps it's because you're doing it in your strength, not in God's strength. One of the lessons that God teaches me at least once a year, I think, is that when I try to do his work in my power, it always wears me out. When I attach my identity to the results of the work I'm trying to do for God, it always wears me out. But when I come back to this idea of I serve by the strength of God in me, then the question is not about the results. Who liked it? How many people came? What was the turnout? What was the criticism? It's not any of that. But it's just about, was I obedient? I felt like God gifted me. I saw an opportunity. I walked out in faith and did it. And I trusted him with the results, and I served by his strength and by his power. And when you're in that space, you can serve until the day that you die. And Peter doesn't put a time frame on here. It's not like, hey, serve until you're 60, 65, 67. Then punt it back to those kids coming behind you. We're going to serve to the end by the strength that God provides for us. So when we live on mission, we're going to begin to understand I've been gifted by God. And my gifts He can use in my speech and my actions. And when we do that, Peter reminds us that we do it all so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To Him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. The goal of our lives is to glorify Jesus. In every word, in every action, in the exercise of every gift. This morning we're going to receive communion together, and as we do, it's such a wonderful reminder to us that Jesus never calls us to do something He has not equipped us to do. So the band's going to come back. They're going to lead us in a final song here in just a moment. As they do, I want to encourage you to hold that cup and that bread in your hand. It's going to take you a minute to figure out how to get the bread out, most likely. If you did not grab communion as you came in this morning, you can head either to the back or over here to the side. There's some on the tables that you can grab. But I want us to take a moment and just reflect on the idea that whatever Jesus calls us to love deeply, to live like the end is near, to use our gifts in service to God and others, He's provided for us to do through His life, death, and resurrection. Jesus never calls us on a path that He's not going to be with us every step of the way. Whatever obstacles you might face, whatever objections you might have, my hope is that this morning as we receive communion, you remember in every way we lack, Jesus is sufficient. And that for every need we have, He has provided. So take a moment, contemplate those things, maybe spend a few moments in prayer together, and then I'll come back and we will receive communion together.
Moving in this place, I worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, healing every life. I worship you. I worship you. 'Cause you are here, turning lives around. I worship you. I worship you. 'Cause you are here, mending every heart. I worship you. I worship you. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keep, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. 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 That is who you are.
As we receive communion this morning, we're being reminded that the life Jesus calls us to is also the life he's made a way for us to follow him on. He's not calling you to obstacles that you can't overcome. He's not calling you to spaces where he'll abandon you. Because of the life, death, and resurrection of Christ, we believe that the same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead now dwells in us. So for whatever challenges, whatever obstacles lie in our path, we believe not only will he be with us, but he will clear the way for us to be faithful to him in those moments. As we receive communion this morning, my prayer for you is that maybe this is the first time you surrender your life to Jesus. You receive him as your Savior, you commit to follow him as your Lord. Or maybe it's a moment where you know where he's calling you, you're just not sure if you can get there. As we receive communion, may it be a reminder to you that God has already taken the very worst thing the world has ever seen and turned it into the very best thing any of us have ever experienced. Will you take the bread with me? And the cup. Will you stand with me? The band's going to lead us through this song one more time. As they do, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to what God may be saying to you. If you're watching online, you can drop off your prayer needs, requests at christianchapel.com/prayer. If you're here in person, if you would like someone to join with you in prayers, maybe to say yes to Jesus for the first time, or maybe it's to really pray and trust that he's leading you on this path. Maybe it's that you're being stretched in your love for others. Whatever space it may be, whatever needs you may have, as we sing this final song, if you'll head out the back doors and to your left, some of our pastors and prayer team members will be waiting to meet with you, believing that God is here to speak to you about the circumstances you're facing. The rest of us, we're going to sing this song as a final declaration of our faith and also an acknowledgement of our need for Jesus to keep making the way for us to follow him on the path he's laying out.